about people who have done well in the world. They're always looking for some reason why they've done well. They must be crooked, or they must be conniving, or they must be arrogant, or they must be psychopathic, and of course all of those things exist. But it's a very bad trick to play on yourself to make the proposition that the person in the world who represents your own ideal is that ideal because of despicable reasons. Because what you do is train yourself that the ideal that you should pursue can only exist if it's motivated by despicable reasons. And then what? Not only is Abel, your brother, dead as your brother in the field in reality, but you've also slaughtered your own ideal. Well, then what the hell are you going to work for? Well, how are you going to live then? Well, bitterly and miserably, that's for sure. Bitterly, miserably, and hopelessly. That's how you're going to live. And it's so rare that I see, especially publicly, that people honestly admit, with sports figures they'll do it. That's one place where that seems to happen. But it's so uncommon for expressions of admiration and gratitude to manifest themselves in any public communication of any sort. Newspapers, TV, YouTube, Twitter. It's almost always undermining and backbiting and criticism, and very often directed to people who have often done little else but bring good things into the world for other people. And that's part of why this is such a profound story. He's a pretty good guy. Everyone knows it. He deserves his good fortune. All the more reason to hate him. That's for sure. Cain broods on his misfortune like a vulture on an egg. He enters the desert wilderness of his own mind. He obsesses over his ill fortune and betrayal. He nourishes his resentment. He indulges in ever more elaborate fantasies of revenge. His arrogance grows to Luciferian proportions. I'm ill-used and oppressed, he thinks. This is a stupid, bloody planet. It can go to hell. And with that, he encounters Satan in the wilderness and falls prey to his temptations. And he does what he can, in John Milton's unforgettable words, to confound the race of mankind in the first root and mingle and involve earth with hell. Done all to spite the great Creator. He turns to evil to obtain what good forbade him, and he does it voluntarily, self-consciously, and with malice. Let him who has ears hear. So that's the first two human beings. The resentful, bitter failure taking an axe to the admirable success. And the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, what hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. Now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. If you want to understand that, which I would recommend, you could read Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. It's a great novel. I think it might be the greatest novel ever written, because I haven't read every novel, but in my experience, it's the greatest novel. And it is exactly this. It says what happens psychologically if you commit the ultimate crime. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. There's no psychologist like Dostoevsky. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is that, I think the punishment that God lays on Cain it's like the inevitable consequences of Cain's action. It's something like that. It's like, well, he killed his brother. There's no going back from that, man. Like, good luck forgiving yourself for that. especially if he was an ideal, especially if he was your ideal, because you haven't just killed your brother and, of course, tortured your parents and the rest of your family. You've deprived the community of someone who is upstanding, and you did it for the worst possible motivations. It's like there's no up from there, right? That's as close to hell as you can manage on earth, I would say. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. That too is like there's also no turning back to God, let's say, after an error like that, because, well, you've done everything you possibly could to spite God, assuming he exists, and the probability that you're going to be able to mend that relationship in your now broken state, when you couldn't mend it to begin with before you did something so terrible, starts to move towards zero. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. That's an interesting thing. I wondered about that for a long time, because you might think, well, why would God take Cain under his wing, so to speak, given what's already happened? And I think it has something to do with the emergence of the idea that it was necessary to prevent tit for tat, revenge slayings. It's something like that, and there's hints of that later in the text, because, it's like, well, I kill your brother, and then you kill two of my brothers, and then I kill your whole family, and then you kill my whole town, and then I kill your whole country, and then we blow up the world. It's like, yeah, that's probably not a very intelligent solution to the initial problem, even though the initial problem, which might be a murder, is not an easy thing to solve. But I think it's something like that. And then the last part of the story is, that's William Blake. So Adam and Eve have discovered their dead son. And Cain has become cognizant, I would say, of what he did and what he is. Right? So it's another entrance into a form of self-consciousness. It's the self-consciousness that Adam and Eve developed was painful enough. They become aware of their own vulnerability and their nakedness, and perhaps even their capacity for evil. But Cain becomes aware of his voluntary engagement with evil itself, and sees that as a crucial human capability. And that's something modern people, it's no wonder we don't take it seriously. Like, I know in the academy and among intellectual circles for decades, the idea of evil has been, it's like, what are you, medieval or something? The whole idea of evil, that's a non-starter as an intellectual starting place, as a topic. And that's something that I've just been unable to understand, because I cannot understand how you could possibly have more than a cursory knowledge of the history of the 20th century, much less a deep knowledge of the history of the 20th century, and to walk away with any other conclusion than, well, good might not exist, but evil, hey, the evidence for that is so overwhelming that only willful blindness could possibly explain denying in its existence. And that was actually a useful discovery for me, because I also concluded, perhaps, that if it was true evil existed, then it was true by inference that its opposite existed. Because the opposite of evil, let's say the evil of the concentration camp, let's say, or we could get more specific about it. We could say there's this one thing that used to happen in Auschwitz where they would take people off the incoming trains, those who lived, that weren't stacked around the outside of the train cars and, froze to death because it was too cold. Those who only had to be stuck in the middle where it was warm enough so that maybe the old people died because they suffocated, but at least some of them were alive when they made it to Auschwitz, and then they took those poor people out. And one of the tricks that the guards used to play on them was to have the newly arrived prisoners hoist like 100-pound sacks of wet salt and carry them from one side of the compound. And these compounds were big. This was a city. It wasn't like a gymnasium. It was like a city. There were tens of thousands of people there. They'd have them carry the sack of wet salt from one side of the compound to the other and then back. Right? And that was to make a mockery out of the notion that work would set you free. It's like, no, you work here, but there's nothing productive about it. The whole point, it's exactly the opposite of sacrifice in some sense. It's we're going to make you act out working, but all it will do is speed your demise. And maybe we can decorate it up a little bit, because not only will it speed up your demise, it will do it in a very painful way, while simultaneously increasing the probability that other people's demises will be painful and sped up. It's a work of art, that's for sure. And to know about that sort of thing and to not regard it as evil means, well, you can figure out what it means for yourself. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived. And one of the criticisms, a fairly common criticism of these biblical stories is, well, if Cain and Abel were the only two people and from Adam and Eve, it's like, where did all these other people come from? And doesn't that make the story like simple-minded? It's like, no, that makes the reader simple-minded. Really, that's the best criticism of this you're going to come up with? You might say, you missed the point. That would be the right response. You missed the point. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he builded the city. And so it's Cain that builds the cities and starts the civilization, and that's pretty rough too, right? So it's the first fratricidal murderer who builds the cities after the name of his son Enoch. And unto Enoch was born Irad, etc., etc., going through the generations. And Lamech took unto him two wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. So this is an attempt to flesh out the genealogy and to describe how culture started in some sense in these tribal communities. And Ada bare Jabal, and he was the father of such as dwell in tents and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all such handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And Tubal-Cain traditionally is the first person who makes weapons of war. And Lamech, back to Lamech, a descendant of Cain, said unto his wives Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech. For I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. Well, what I see in that is this proclivity of this murderous capacity of Cain as it manifests itself as society develops to a murderous intent that transcends the mere killing of a brother. You hurt me, I hurt you back. It's no. You hurt me, I kill you and 6 other people. And the thing that happens after that is to not make it 7 people, but to make it 70 people. And so there's this idea that once that first murderous seed is sown, it has this proclivity to manifest itself exponentially. And that's a warning. And that's also why I think Tubal-Cain, who's one of Cain's descendants, was the first person who made weapons of war. And that's pretty much the story of Cain and Abel. And it's a hell of a story, as far as I can tell. And I think it's worth thinking about pretty much forever, because there's so many, it has so many facets, And I think the most usefully revealing of those facets is the potential for the story, once understood, to shed light on not your own failure, not even on your rejection by being, let's say, but on the proclivity to murder the best and the best in you for revenge upon that violation. Because what that means, and we know that knowledge of good and evil entered the world, so to speak, with Adam and Eve's transgression, is that now not only does humanity have to contend with tragedy and suffering, and even the unharvested fruits of proper sacrifice, but with the introduction of real malevolence into the world. So there's the fall into history, and then there's the discovery of sacrifice as a medication for the fall. And then there's a counterposition, which is the emergence of malevolence as the enemy of proper sacrifice. And that's where we're left at the end of Cain and Abel. And that's the end of that lecture. Thank you. All right.
Okay.